Today's video is sponsored by Apotheosis RPG. More details later in the video. We've all been there, right? There's been an encounter that's been led up to for months now. Your campaign has been building to this. The big bad evil guy, the boss, the person who you are supposed to defeat in order to save the day. The people who are in the way of your party achieving their ultimate goal. The big bad evil guy.
Do I really look like a guy with a plan?
And yet, sometimes it can be really disappointing once you meet them. See, the deal is Dungeons & Dragons is a number-based game. It's also a luck-based game. When you roll dice, you roll them, and then you go off of what you have. But if it is rolling dice, it's gambling. You don't know what you're gonna get. It is up to chance. And because of that, sometimes it can lead to a very disappointing encounter. And a lot of the times that can be a good thing. If the dice roll, they create an interesting story, something you didn't expect, maybe you steamroll an encounter, that's awesome. But when it comes to a boss, when it comes to the big encounter of the campaign, if it doesn't come through properly, it can be disappointing rather than exciting that you were able to steamroll him. I know I've experienced that before, and I've seen several players experience it before too. You don't want the boss to kill you, but you want it to be a hard struggle. You want to know that when you came up against this person, it was worth the struggle to get there. And so how do you make sure that it does that while also still adhering to the dice and promising luck? Well, let's talk about that. Hey everybody, I promise we'll get back to the video in just a second, but before we do, I really would like to thank today's sponsor, Apotheosis. You know how like half of you always comment on my videos saying that there are other systems out there other than D&D, which yes, I understand, but I'm gonna actually talk about a different one today. And what makes it awesome is this one actually specifically focuses on what I love talking about, character creation. Doing away with the admittedly simple but sometimes boring system of choosing a race and a class, Apotheosis instead focuses specifically on giving you all the customization needs that you could ever want in order to be able to create your unique character. And they have a ton of options for the races too as well. You have your typical ones that you would expect, but they also have some unique ones that only come from Apotheosis. For example, have you ever wanted to play those butterflies from the new Peacemaker show? Or, gosh, I hope this isn't too niche of a reference, the Yeerks from Animorphs? That reference is probably incredibly dated. Well, with Apotheosis you can. Specifically, you can play the Neurocytes, strange little creatures that burrow their way into other creatures' heads in order to be able to control them and walk around in their skin. Not only that, Apotheosis has rules specifically expanding on the different types of things you can do in combat, such as collaboration or interacting with the environment, which I will admit is something that I love doing because there's nothing I love more than wasting my turn trying to do something interesting rather than, probably what I should be doing, attacking. The rules also continue to expand off this concept when it comes to magic. Many of the spells are specifically focused for utility and setting up your teammates for awesome encounters in combat, leading to a more collaborative feel. Ultimately, the rules can lead to much more cinematic moments, and I think that they're pretty amazing. So if you guys are interested in something like that and want to expand your way outside of D&D, please go check out Apotheosis. The link is in the description. Anyways, back to the video. So when it comes to a boss encounter, there's a few things you need to keep in mind. One, you need it to be built up to. If it's just a boss who appears out of nowhere, it doesn't matter if it's a tough encounter or not. It is disappointing regardless. If your players come up against something and it's just out of nowhere, this super powerful creature and oh hey, I was behind everything the entire time, well, I mean, it really just comes across as a bad movie climax. How many times have you watched a movie and a villain showed up at the end and suddenly you started fighting them but you didn't know who the villain was and you felt invested? It doesn't happen. It doesn't make a lot of sense. There needs to be backstory, build up, and honestly, if you can manage it, a previous encounter with the villain. A previous encounter with the villain creates investment and hatred towards them and can be awesome. But that's not exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about how to make sure that a boss encounter, the BBEG, the final fight, comes across as satisfying and not disappointing. And that can be really difficult because the perfect quintessential battle with a big bad evil guy will be hard, it will be dramatic, and it will be barely won. Usually you also want it to include themes from the campaign in order to be able to defeat the big bad evil guy. Is the campaign all about avarice and greed and how it can infect somebody's soul? Well then in the final encounter, when your party manages to beat the villain, you'd want it to be something where they overcome their own greed, or the villain succumbs to his greed and that's why he loses. But when you create this encounter, it needs to be close. Don't die, don't die. It needs to be hard, but you want the heroes to win out in the end, probably through some sort of sacrifice. And getting it that fine-tuned is just hard. It's hard because balancing encounters in D&D already is difficult. So being able to get that final encounter, it just is a difficult task to do, and a monumental one at that. And if you don't land it, it can really feel disappointing. So what do you do? Well, I've run several different boss encounters in my campaign, and I've had players come up against the big bad evil guy. And here's how I did it. In the first campaign I ever ran, there were two major battles. The first one was kind of the midway point of the campaign, where they fought the first big bad evil guy and were able to become heroes of the land. And the second was the biggest, baddest evil guy, Tiamat herself, in order to be able to become heroes of the plains, the realms of the world itself. And in those two battles, I really struggled with how to make it climactic without being disappointing. In the first battle, they fought against Darathin, a demigod of light, somebody who had managed to steal a god's voice and had become one of the most powerful demigods in the land. Not only that, they had to fight with a kraken as well. It was a tough encounter and way blown out of proportion. A lot of people probably think that a kraken plus a demigod is an insane battle, and you would have been correct. But my players were incredibly strong, and I had given them a lot of very powerful items through the course of the campaign, so I felt comfortable doing it. It did end up being an incredibly close fight, tough and a slog. Took 6.5 hours to get through the whole thing. And by the end of it, while yes, it did end up being satisfying and they won and they felt accomplished by it, it was a little bit disappointing because it took so long and there wasn't as much dramatic weight. Eventually it just became who could beat the crap out of the other the fastest and be able to win this. And that's not exactly the sort of thing that I wanted. I managed to fix this in the second battle. Tiamat. See, Tiamat was a goddess, I mean literally the goddess of dragons, and it was really difficult to figure out exactly how to create an encounter with that. How do I make her seem ultimately powerful while still beatable? And what I ended up doing was I didn't give her hit points. Instead, the purpose of the battle was to prevent her from exiting a portal that she was trying to get through. She was trying to escape a plane that she had been imprisoned on for millennia and enter into the world and take it over for herself. And so the party needed to prevent her from coming through. So what they had to do was they had to deal a certain amount of damage each round. If they were not able to deal that amount of damage, she would move forward a certain amount. If they were able to deal that amount of damage, she would move backwards a certain amount. The whole point was to survive her and deal enough damage to push her back through the portal. Meanwhile, there were other monsters coming through that they had to contend with and actually could fight, but they had to make sure that they were slinging enough damage towards Tiamat while also fighting these enemies off. And that was much more entertaining because it no longer became about who was going to just beat the crap out of each other. There was a goal. There was a specific mission besides kill somebody. They had to deal enough damage to push her back while preventing these monsters from killing them.
If someone pushes you push back.
And that made it a much more interesting encounter. So rule number one for creating an interesting boss encounter and making it not disappointing, give an alternate goal than killing the boss. And it doesn't have to be anything mechanical. I had something mechanical. They had to deal a certain amount of damage. And that became really difficult because they had to save their higher and higher level spell slots as the battle went on to be able to deal that damage to her. But you can do something similar, but not quite as intense. I mean, say you have a boss that is very quintessentially important to one of the backstories of your characters. They are somebody who has been possessed or taken over by something. Well, now the goal is not just kill them. They have to find a way to help that person survive. Or if they do kill the boss, they have to grapple with the fact that they've just killed their friend. That is a good way to add tension. It adds a memorable stake. Or say you're not really trying to kill the boss, you're just trying to stop a ritual that they're currently enacting before it happens. Adding a secondary or primary goal aside from killing the boss creates a much more interesting encounter and leads to the potential of not killing the boss, but still winning the encounter. And that is a lot more entertaining, isn't it? The other thing that I would recommend doing when looking at all of this is when you design your encounter, make sure to give the boss a clear weakness that the players must learn about. Make them overpowerful, make them incredibly strong, but give the party the chance to learn how to get around that strength and find that specific weakness. One time my party fought against a lich and she was incredibly powerful. She even had a sphere that blocked magic that followed her around as she flew. And this is against a party of mostly magic casters. And so in order to be able to defeat her, they had to rely on the fighter to get up to her and break her concentration so they could rain hellfire down her.
How about a magic trick?
Once they broke the concentration, she was doomed. She stood no chance. But getting to that point and managing to get to her was really difficult. Meanwhile, she had a Dracolich-like entity that was fighting the rest of the party, so they were trying to survive and beat that while still managing to get to the Lich in time, waiting for the fighter to break the concentration. And to this day, it has been one of my favorite moments when the concentration finally broke and every single one of the spellcasters unleashed all at once every high-level spell slot they had to try and kill her before she could bring it back up.
What I call a close encounter.
An amazing moment. I absolutely loved it. But that's the important thing. And it's giving a specific weakness to the boss that they can exploit, but they have to be clever to do it. And that really is what it comes down to when it comes to creating interesting boss encounters. Give the players the ability to really nail down the boss, but they have to be clever in order to be able to do it. Don't make it just who can deal the most damage to each other, because that becomes boring. And it could have become boring for the Tiamat fight, because the goal really was to deal the most damage to her. But they had to be able to do that while also managing their resources and fighting the current things on the battlefield. And if you can do that and work with all of that, it should create a much more interesting encounter and something that's not disappointing, because the real thing that creates something disappointing is a boss dying quickly. But if you could add more nuance to it than that, it could be a lot more fun. So try it out. Go out into the world, make it your own, you beautiful bastards. Don't forget to have a great day, and never forget to play your role. A huge shout out to all those divine bastards over on our Patreon that helped make this video happen. I'd also like to take an additional very personal thank you to BKBW, Diet Blue, Duplicolor, Malcadil, I hope I pronounced that right, Sassy Cat Productions, Sorit, Supreme Court, Tin Eye, and Void Mystic. We wouldn't be able to do what we do without our patrons, and we are very thankful for your continued support. You guys are the absolute best, and I will never take your support for granted.